All right. Hello, and welcome to a very special episode of Drive-In Double Feature. I'm Ryan,
I'm Nathan.
and this is the podcast where we talk about two movies every week, every Tuesday and Thursday. And for our Thursday edition, this is going to be a very personal one for me. And we were talking about 1954's Godzilla, directed by Ishiro Honda. This is one of my favorite movies of all time, and it pretty much has shaped my movie taste ever since I was younger. But Nathan, I want to know what your experience is before I go into my long diatribe about how I got into Godzilla.
With Godzilla? Oh, wow. Godzilla is so weird. I feel like it's no matter what, when you're young, you love movies or not, Godzilla is just part of culture. I feel like he's like one of the most famous characters of all time, maybe the most famous monster. Everybody knows about Godzilla. It's just a thing. But my first memory with a Godzilla movie is unfortunately the Matthew Broderick one. I remember I was really getting into movies. My parents had a big box of VHSs, and I was just digging through, and I found that Godzilla, and you know what? I enjoyed it as a kid. It was fun to me as a kid. I had no idea that it was actually just an awful movie.
Did your parents explain to you, though, that there was a preceding movie, or this was like an American version of it, or did you think this was like a completely new movie?
That's a good question. I'm not too sure. I'm not too sure what my mindset was then. Probably that it was its own thing. But I mean, at some point in my childhood, I figured out, oh, Godzilla is Japanese. That this is a remake. That it's a Japanese monster. Because I've known about, this movie, this series for a very long time. I've just never gotten around to it. Unfortunately, my foreign film repertoire is very limited, or was very limited until recent years. But I'm happy to experience this. I know you're a big Godzilla head, so what was your introduction?
Well, so actually, Godzilla, the very first Godzilla movie, is not how I was introduced to Godzilla. And I mean, so going into, I had a passing knowledge of Godzilla. This is probably like when I was in second or third grade. And I remember going to, it was a big box store. I think it was like Sam's or whatever. And, they had a bunch of VHSs there. And of course I knew what King Kong was because of the King Kong ride. And I knew King Kong is just as famous as Godzilla almost, but they had the VHS tape, Godzilla versus King Kong. And I was just like, oh, like these two things that I'm kind of aware about, like they actually had a meeting at some point. Like the thought that you have a crossover like that was just like, oh, I didn't know they made like crossovers like with two like pre-established characters or whatever. So I bought that. I bought that one, and I loved it. I mean, that movie is a lot more sillier than this one, but it is it really shaped a lot of my taste in movies because I've always loved these types of movies ever since then. And it's one of the ones where I felt like a really personal attachment to it. Like, this is my series, or like, this is something where I just get really emotional, like talking about, just because it always just fills me with it reminds me so much of my childhood, and it always makes me so happy talking about these types of movies. So, awesome. And yeah. And by then I pretty much got like every Godzilla thing I could do. I had a Godzilla VHS box set, which had five random ones. There's no particular order to it. And I eventually did see Godzilla, King of the Monsters, and I rented that from the VHS on VHS from Blockbuster or whatever. And I'll be honest, I thought it was pretty boring when I was a kid.
Really?
Because basically, you're just, when you're a kid, your tastes are very like, you got to grab my attention right now type of thing. So
it makes sense.
Yeah. So, I was just more looking for like the giant monsters, and there's not that much giant monsters. It's a very serious movie, and King of the Monsters is not necessarily one that you're not going to get, like, the cheesy kind of action to it. And I didn't end up seeing So this was the only way. I mean, if you go back to, and there was literally almost no way, unless you did like an import, of actually seeing the original Japanese cut of Godzilla. King of the Monsters was the only way you could see it for the longest time.
Wow, that's that, which is we'll talk about that later, but which is kind of sad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there was not an official DVD release of Gojira, the Japanese version, until 2004.
Holy crap. Wow.
So by then, which ended up being a really good time, because that's when I started, my movie taste started changing, and I started wanting to see a lot more serious works and things like that. And watching that, it was just like perfect timing, just hit me right at the same time, because it was like a mixture of my childhood, and at the same time it was like, okay, this is how the movie was intention and supposed to be viewed.
Yeah, exactly. I can get that. That is interesting. That, I mean, I get it, because King of the Monsters was specifically made for America, and that we would just keep that cut. I'm just happy that we moved so far ahead in what we want out of films that we're able to get this original version, and we are able to watch it very easily.
Yeah, that's the one thing. I mean, and one thing too, we've talked about Criterion in the past with Police Story, but this one also has, it's like one of my most prized possessions now, because it's like this giant book of just the original movies from the Godzilla franchise from the 50s all the way to the 70s.
Yeah. Thanks to Ryan. It was a nice Christmas gift. I love it. It's actually sitting in my, next to my computer now, because I was going through it watching them. I know we're kind of early or whatever, but I'm excited to watch some more of these. I'm not going to lie. Go dig through this book. It's so good. I love Criterion.
Absolutely. And I mean, if I didn't express it enough, the whole reason why I got that for you is because, obviously, part of it's like it's some content for the podcast, but mainly it's just me wanting to share something that I get really excited about with you. Yeah. So that's why I wanted to gift that to you. But Nathan, so I just went on this really long piece about how much I love this movie, but Nathan, I am dying to know. It'd be pretty crappy of you to just to say you didn't like this movie. So right. Please give me your open and honest, positive opinion of this movie.
Oh, open and honest. So I did end up watching, or at least the Japanese version of this, twice. Watched it once regular and once on commentary. You know what? Both times I loved it. I really did. It is a great movie. I'm not going to sit here and crap on it. After watching all of the American Godzillas, especially I compare it. Let's compare it to the remake that was made recently, I think 2014. This shows the perfect amount of monster, right? It builds that dread. It's so like looming over you that Godzilla exists, but you don't see him, but you just get to see him enough. The miniatures are beautiful. The photography is amazing. The use of matte paintings, it's all there. It is an awesome experience. I can't believe I had never seen these before. It sucks that I skipped them for so long, but I'm really happy to experience these now. Super cool movie. And just as an aside, I kind of liked Godzilla, King of the Monsters, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. But of course, the Japanese Godzilla is the way to watch this movie. I'd recommend it for anybody, really. I know a lot of people have an aversion to foreign movies, but this is definitely an essential Japanese film, I would say.
Yeah, and it's really super easy, and I'm really glad you liked it, by the way. I would want you to give me your honest opinion of it, even if you didn't like it, but I'm really glad it ended up working out. But,
yeah, of course.
It's really easy, though, to write off these movies as dumb monster movies, because, I mean, bare bones, if you're just like, oh, that's just a movie with a guy in a rubber suit. I mean, we'll get into it when we talk about the commentary tracks for like the American movie, but the commentary is done by a man named David Klatt, who wrote a really good comprehensive critical history about the filmography of the Godzilla series. And he had a really passionate like speech like during one of the commentaries about like why can't a movie like this be considered art? I mean, like versus like any other foreign movie. Like why is this one disregarded just because there's a guy in a rubber suit?
Yeah, and that's something like that he really hones in on is like a lot of the disparaging that movies like this get, especially off of like I loved his one comparison. You know, one of the great directors, Akira Kurosawa, comes up a lot in his talks, and he talks about an actor that's in any Akira Kurosawa movie, and critics will call him the greatest actor of all time. Well, he's in Godzilla, and they called him garbage in that. And it's just because of the context of it being a monster movie that a critic might put it down. Now, I do luckily think that times have changed. I do. I think appreciation for these movies have grown, and that makes me really happy. But there definitely was a time period where Godzilla is just a dumb fare. You know, who cares about this? So I totally feel that.
Yeah. But at the same time, so like historical context, I mean, it is really easy to write it off as a dumb movie as today's context, but historically, there wasn't a movie like this at the time. So just kind of digging into like what the time period was like, King Kong comes out in 1933, and that pretty much shapes a whole generation of filmmakers. Ishiro Honda, Tsuburaya, like the people that helped create Godzilla saw those movies and they became really invested in it. And then the other movie that came right before it was Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, which was a movie which was helped created by Ray Harryhausen, another really famous special effects guy. And King Kong actually re-released back into the 50s in 1952, which that's wild to think about when you think of something like that, wouldn't it? Like imagine like you see a movie when you're a kid, and then you cannot see this movie ever again until 20 years later.
Yeah, I forget that's a thing. Like, just like the idea of like, oh, I have to wait like 30 years to watch this movie again. No wonder people saw movies over and over and over again, because it was like, oh, when will I ever get a chance to see this again? Sometimes you see a movie and you never see it again, or at least you at the time thought you wouldn't. I love that. I love thinking about that.
I know it's just it's crazy to think about. But something like that though, when people had such a nostalgic feeling to it, or they wanted to see it again. In King Kong in 1952 ended up breaking box office records. Even back then, it beat its previous record and became one of the highest grossing movies that year as well. And then it was kind of like, okay, now is the perfect time to make a movie like this.
And I guess Godzilla also was built off of fears, right? Nuclear fears, of course. That's definitely the big deal. Well, I actually didn't know the context. I guess the whole time I thought Godzilla was more about the A-bomb and, the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which that leaks into it. But I guess it's based off of a real, like a ship was near where America was launching H-bombs and people got radiated to death. I didn't know that. Scary stuff.
Yeah, and that's how the movie opens too. It's a recreation of that, of like a shipping boat is out there and Godzilla attacks it, and there's a big flash in the movie, just like if an H-bomb went off at the same time. Because they even said, like in the boat, the Lucky Dragon, the one that was hit by the H-bomber in the same vicinity, they said when it exploded, the light was so bright, it was dark out, and it was almost like a second sun just came out.
Scary, yeah. And I guess that mixed with King Kong just re-releasing, making money, two things just come two and two together to make something so iconic, which I guess I loved hearing about this. It was almost not, pieces perfectly came together to make this, right? Because originally it's supposed to be like an octopus monster, stuff like that. A lot went into this.
Yeah, Godzilla went through many iterations before it became its final product. Like you said, it was originally like going to be this giant octopus type movie. And then pretty much it became at one point when the first draft of the Godzilla script, it was almost like a complete ripoff of Beast from 20,000 Fathoms.
Yeah.
And, but it's just funny when you think about it now, because it evolved from that. And there's very little similarities between the two movies, but right now, Godzilla is way overshadows Beast of 20,000 Fathoms. Like, that's like a trivia question now. Like, oh, what's this famous monster movie? So
yeah, it's definitely like, oh, it's for people that have a little more like, they want to dig a little deeper into that genre. The reason they're similar is because Beast from a Thousand Thousands, right, is claymation, which is what they wanted to do with this, but I guess it would take too long. So that's where the famous man in the suit comes from. And let me tell you, in this first one, I think it looks awesome. I think this suit looks cool. I love the destruction it brings. It shows just enough of it on camera so it doesn't look fake. To me, of course, watching it, 70 years later, I'm like, oh, like I can think like it looks fake. But for its time, and even now, I still think it looks really nice.
Yeah, I mean, the suit looks great. I mean, they wanted to combine many different elements from different dinosaurs. I mean, obviously T-Rex element is in there, but there's other ones they implemented too. The Stegosaurus is the dorsal fin on the back, and they also added ears to Godzilla too, just to add like one layer of relatability to him.
Oh, really? I forgot that little bit of trivia. That's awesome.
Yeah, there's little tiny ears on Godzilla if you see them. It's not very big.
But he has little ears. Yeah, because I guess that's one thing that I really liked about some of the special features is that the star of the American version, Raymond Burr, talks about or he said that Godzilla, you feel bad for him in the end. He's a misunderstood creature, kind of like Creature from the Black Lagoon. So I kind of get that relatability working into that.
Yeah, well, so like the whole deal with it, like you had said too about going back to the nuclear testing. I mean, whether you want to say that America was right for bombing Japan or whatever, it became so ingrained in the culture there of like they had like this shadow kind of over their whole country about they're having to deal with radiation deaths and people getting really sick. I mean, even the one man who died from the H-bomb, they said he died 7 months later, but they said it was like a really slow, painful death.
It was 6 months long.
Yeah.
In pain the whole time. Horrible.
Yeah. And this movie is kind of like a protest. Like we should scale down nuclear testing or just stop it. And it's not even so much like a Japanese, like, oh, feel bad for us for Japan. It's more of like we need to, as an entire world, we need to stop this altogether, or there might be something a lot worse coming along. And Godzilla is actually a product of all that testing, because Godzilla is supposed to be this monster that lives underwater. And from all the nuclear testing, that's what kind of awakens him. Mm-hmm. And you can tell his skin and stuff has the same scarring as other nuclear blast survivors have. Oh. So that's one intentional design they had in there because they wanted to be a lot more relatable. So, I mean, it's a really clear symbolism of what Godzilla is supposed to be.
That's insane. That's like crazy how much thought went into it. I guess at first glance you could just think, oh, it's just a big dinosaur, but I guess a lot more goes into it than you think.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. But Japanese audiences loved him. I mean, it was just kind of like you said, like when there was people that say like when Godzilla does die, spoilers, but when Godzilla does die, it's actually a really sad scene. And even at the end, it's a really sad ending. It's not like this big triumphant, like we killed the monster type of thing.
Yeah, you know what? That's what I found really interesting about this movie. And we're skipping ahead. I mean, it's a 70-year-old movie, so I think we're okay. But the ending of this movie isn't huge. It's not a big ending, what I would expect out of a monster movie, like planes shooting at him and stuff, which happens. But the last 20 minutes is a scientist going underwater because he has a weapon of mass destruction to destroy Godzilla. And he goes underwater and they look at each other and a man sacrifices his life to take him out. Godzilla doesn't even really do much action in that scene. You just kind of see him. It's really interesting. I actually like how muted that ending is. It's kind of bittersweet in a way.
I know. And the most heart-wrenching part about that is like after the weapon is released, Godzilla comes back up out of the water and kind of like lets out like this last like pained roar. And then sinks back down to the ocean, and then that's where he dies.
Yeah, it's definitely sad, but you know what? We all know he rises again. So
yeah, well, I mean, I mean, his skeleton is at the very end of the movie.
Yes,
and I'll be honest, I don't remember a whole lot of raids again. So when we do eventually cover it, I'm really interested to see how they're going to fix that.
Yeah, exactly where he dies. I wonder if they'll just like forget about it, or another bomb goes off and just reanimates his skeleton or something.
It's probably just that he's back and they don't ever mention it again. But
yeah, I could see that. But that's I liked about this movie. I felt like this was more horror than anything. Maybe like horror thriller, right? I think this movie has like this really tense feeling throughout all of it. The first like 30-40 minutes, it's all a build up to Godzilla. You see like buildings get destroyed, you see footprints, you see small things. God, I can't believe how well done like of a monster. Like when I was watching it, it's like, this is how you do a monster movie. This is how you do it. You know, it's all, well, at least a monster movie like this, it's all build up and then you get to see Godzilla. It's cool.
Yeah, and I mean, the plot wise, it's just kind of it's really it's a story you've seen before, where it's just they've noticed like little small attacks, and then they start attacking smaller villages, and then it kind of builds up until there's this big grand finale. But I do like the scaling of that, because you don't see Godzilla until about 20 or so minutes into the movie, and it's just his head just peeking above a ridge, and that's where you see the monster. And then after that, you don't see him again for a while, and then he comes back and does some smaller attacks, and until finally there's about a 14 to 15 minute sequence when he's destroying Tokyo.
Yeah, and there's a scene that just keeps popping up in my head of a mother holding her children as Godzilla is going to kill them. Like, oh,
that scene is so sad.
Yeah, it's insane, because you wouldn't really. It shows the human side of the destruction rather than just buildings being destroyed. It really makes that connection. I think connection to atomic bombs and stuff destroying families.
Which, if you remember what she said, is like when she's holding her two children, she's like, "Don't worry, we'll be seeing Daddy really soon."
Exactly. Which I guess people have said that's hinting to the death in World War II. But the guy debunked that.
Yeah, he debunked that during one of the commentaries. But yeah, but one thing too that people always say is like the weakest parts about these movies are the human elements. And normally too, I would say back in the other ones, it's really minor. You really don't get attached to these characters, and you don't really spend a whole lot of time with them because Godzilla is the main attraction. But this one, there's a really strong human element to it. And going back and rewatching this after you and I have talked about other Kurosawa movies with like Seven Samurai and stuff. It's so crazy to like see like the same people that were like stars in those movies are just they're on screen. It's Godzilla movies treated with the same amount of pedigree as another Kurosawa movie.
It's crazy. Yeah, I didn't even know Takashi Shimura showed up, who is Ikiru from the popular Akira Kurosawa movie. And he's the main character in this, and he plays it just as well as he would those movies, takes it very seriously. I like his scientist character. In the end, he gets his moment of like, I don't know, because his whole deal is he wants to keep Godzilla alive, but he also knows that it can't stay alive. It's like such a gray area. What a great character.
Yeah, he plays it so well, and there's one scene too when he's like just brooding in his office and just like saying like we should be studying this creature, we shouldn't be trying to destroy it, and which is true. I mean, that's a scientific wonder, but at the same time, it's it's destroying half of their city and country. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I mean, it makes sense that they'd want to destroy it. It's killing millions of, maybe not millions, but thousands. There is a love triangle in this movie. I won't say that I'm like adored the love triangle, but it's well done. I do think it's a good, like it's at least interesting enough to keep these human characters in mind and keep it interesting.
No, and I would honestly agree with that. I mean, I do. I mean, the characters have enough of. It's not like later movies where the characters almost have zero personality, but this one's they have like enough of a personality. I mean, you have Emiko, who's the woman of the triangle, and she's interested in one, but she's kind of betrothed to another type of thing, and she's really innocent, and she's trying to make sure she's making like the right decisions. And then you have Ogata, which is the ship crew member that super heroic, wants to save the day type of thing. And then you have Dr. Serizawa, which he's got the really cool like, eye patch.
Oh yeah, he's
design.
Cool.
Which he got it during World War II, and he looks really good in there, and he's kind of like the main scientist who kind of comes up with the solution of how to destroy Godzilla.
Yeah, I like that plot line because he makes this bomb. I mean, it's wacky thinking about it, but in the context of the movie, it never took me out of it. But it's they takes the oxygen out of water, and it supposedly kills all life in the water. It's just crazy, you know. It's just as bad as probably the H bomb or whatever, and that's what he's dealing with. He's like, I don't want to give these plans away. It has to be a secret, but it could save and kill Godzilla and save everybody.
Which, yeah, and he even says, which we'll get into the differences of the two, but in the Japanese one, he makes it explicitly clear, like, I don't want anybody getting their hands on this. Mm-hmm. And kind of the reason why he sacrifices himself in the end is he was in love with Emiko, but he kind of notices that Emiko and Ogata have gotten a lot closer, and with like kind of like the destruction that Godzilla did, it's kind of like, I have to do this, and he sacrifices himself so that way the plans of his bomb go away, and the Godzilla is destroyed as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. You know, it definitely is a little more in depth and has feeling than most movies like this. I mean, I haven't seen any other of these old Godzilla movies, but from stuff that I have seen, it usually isn't that deep. And I really appreciate how much meaning this movie has behind it. It really just brings it up a whole nother level. Yeah.
And one thing too that I do like about this movie is that Godzilla is not a destruction machine. He's not a killing machine. He's not like a wild animal type of thing. And they even had like rules of Godzilla where he wasn't allowed to just start aimlessly destroying buildings. They wanted Godzilla to be like this big force in nature. He's destroying indiscriminately.
Yeah, exactly. He's just wrecking. Like, not even anything like of note, like, well, of course Tokyo, but he's like taking down like radio towers and stuff like that. It's not like a revenge plot.
No, and they even said like when there's an interview on the Criterion set when they interview Nakajima, the actor that was inside the Godzilla costume, that Honda basically was just like, when you're going through the city, don't just start pushing things over. Just, you know, when you're walking and something is in your way, you can feel free to knock it out of the way, stomp on it, but don't spend a bunch of time destroying it. Just kind of knock it over and move on type of thing.
Mm-hmm. I really like that. I like that. I don't know. It shows that a lot of thought was put into everything. No, man, great movie. I wanted to talk about this great train scene. Oh my God, with the miniature of the train moving looks so good. And the way Godzilla like is in the background, and then in the foreground they have people running away. The special effects that they did in that scene is just so cool.
Yeah, it really is crazy. I mean, with the miniatures alone, I mean, like they said, they didn't do miniatures like this back in the day. Like you said, it was either stop motion or claymation or just whatever, but actually building like a full city or objects to scale of a human, mm-hmm. like of a giant, that wasn't done like that before. And this was seen as a huge undertaking.
Yeah, and look at it now. Look how influential I think this movie is, just from the special effects point of view.
And going back to King Kong really quick, I don't know if you watched any of the special features on the 2005 King Kong movie, the Peter Jackson one, mm-hmm. but they actually said like they actually used the special effects of trying to recreate like a famous scene from the original King Kong.
That's
And
right. Yeah, the
and
dinosaur scene, right?
right, and they
Yeah.
said like that took a million times longer to do that than how they would do it like back in the day, like what they
Hmm.
can do now. It just said it was it so that you can imagine how long it took King Kong to make.
Yeah, exactly. To make it look like it did. Because, I mean, computer graphics, it's so much easier to do, or at least not as painstaking in the filming process. So, because, I mean, it sounded like the miniatures that they made in this movie took forever. I mean, well, shorter than it did claymation, but it took a while to set up.
We should dig into the Criterion set of the first movie. You want to real quick?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah. So the big deal here is commentary, and I thought this was crazy that the dude did. Well, you remember his name? I'm forgetting his name now. I feel so
David
bad.
Klatt.
David Klatt.
Mhm.
He does an incredible job, and he does a commentary for two movies, and he has enough information to fill two of these movies up. I think he did a great job.
He's
I
really good.
Yeah, I really had no complaints. It's what I like out of a commentary. I listened to it while I worked. I could look, but listen, look away. I didn't have to be constantly looking at the screen. And I think it was perfect. It was a good history lesson, gave all the information I need. Really, it upped my appreciation for the original. And that actually kind of upped my appreciation for the American version. So,
Right. And I wanted to like so the two different commentaries are like you said, it's very specific to each one. The Japanese one is kind of like how the movie came together and what is the historical context for that movie. And then the American one, it goes into the historical context for that one. But in the Japanese one, he does really, I mean, it's super in depth. I mean, he talks the whole time. I mean, he gives like a history lesson basically of all the directors and all the crew members involved and how the story came together. And like I said, his book too pretty much covers a lot of that same detail, but it's a lot more in depth. Obviously, there's a lot more anecdotes in there, but it's really informative too. And that's like you said, it's what I'm looking for in when I'm looking for in a commentary, because normally some of these are so dry and just so uninteresting that it's just like okay, or just it doesn't even sound interesting at all.
yeah, if you go back to movies with the spine, we've definitely had some negative things to say about some commentaries. So
Oh man, did we?
I'm very happy that this one was a positive one. Another thing, this movie is stacked with interviews. That is the big special feature for this one. Is it has interview after interview after interview.
Yeah. So they were all filmed like in 2011, so about 10 years ago. And luckily, they still had some crew members still alive
Mm-hmm.
60 years later. So they interviewed the original star of the movie, the guy, the leading male. He was in the movie, and he has a really funny story where he comes in and introduces himself because when he gets cast in the role of Godzilla, he was never had like a starring role, and he would tell everybody like, "Oh, hello, I'm here. I'm the star of the movie," and they would very gruffly tell him like, "No, Godzilla is the star of the movie."
Yeah, exactly. No, and I think there's fun. I see what I liked about these interviews, right? Just to give them like a broad overview from what I listened to. There's a couple I didn't finish. I'll be honest. Like there's a 50-minute one with the composer that I was like, okay, I'm good. I appreciate getting the Japanese perspective on it, right? The getting from something from the Japanese people, how they felt in the effects. Because there was an interview with a movie critic, a film critic from over Japan, and he gave the overall mood of Japan. And I mean, of course, I think the commentaries are great, but it's also really cool to hear somebody that was there at the time who was a part of the cultural like zeitgeist of Godzilla, and I really loved hearing those opinions.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And the one I loved a lot, there was one about the special effects, which they actually had one of the guys that helped build the Godzilla suit still there. And they're interviewing him. And they were talking about how the suit had to be fixed constantly and like it had to look brand new, like every time they walked on set. So after each day of filming, they would come in and have to make any repairs, like if there's any tears or rips or anything like that, they had to fix that immediately. In fact, when they do the Godzilla when he breathes his radioactive breath, they put tinfoil in there to protect the mouth, but it would still like burn the teeth. And after each take, they had to go in and immediately fix that.
I couldn't imagine.
And they said to like Nakajima, the suit, there was 2 suits. One suit was originally over 200 pounds that he had to lug around. And it was too cumbersome, and they eventually cut it in half. And so that way he can have like a pair of legs just for stomping. But the suit that they originally went with, it was so hot that he can only wear that suit for about like 2 to 3 minutes each time. And they had to take off that suit, and by the end, he could probably fill out like 2 or 3 cups worth of sweat by the end of it.
Wasn't it like, a heat stroke during filming was a good day, is what they said, or something?
Yeah. And because at the time, they said back in those days, there was no AC in those studios. And they said pretty much each day they would walk in, it'd be over 120 degrees inside of the studio.
Man, it's a little sad that every DVD on this set, I don't think all the movies have supplements. I would love for that, but that's probably just an insane undertaking.
It is. Yeah. But I mean, luckily too, when we do talk about it, the book too does cover each movie individually. So we'll have a little bit of stuff I can bring to the table.
That's good. That's really good. And I'm sure if you look it up, there's definitely content out there for each one.
Yeah. In fact, there's one YouTube channel, Big Action Bill, and he does an entire history of Godzilla. And just for the first movie alone, it's over an hour long, which he references a lot of David Klatt's material and the movie commentary and interviews. And he does an individual video for each movie. They're at least about 20 to 30 minutes long for each movie.
That's awesome. No, that's good. Okay, so look at that. We got even more stuff to pull from.
I feel like I'm missing a lot here. There's other stuff too. We could say, like the suit motion was like slowed down to make it look a lot more realistic. Historical context alone, though, I think, this is most definitely the most famous movie that you and I have talked about, wouldn't you say?
I would say so. Just like I said at the beginning, Godzilla is such a cultural icon everywhere. People know the name and may have never even seen a movie with him in it or anything. It's so big that I don't think we can cover it all in one episode and have it be a decent time. It's unfortunate. Maybe we'll revisit this one day. This is episode what are we on? Episode 18. And I really hope to do this with you for a very long time. And if we have to go back and revisit, I'm down to do it with you.
But Nathan, I think the most important supplement that we have to talk about, which you've already been referencing it a bunch, is the American version of Godzilla. Because we're not done yet. We have to dig into this one, even though it sounded like we were wrapping up. We have to talk about this one, and we're got to talk about real quickly Godzilla, King of the Monsters. And I got to tell you, when I first sat down to watch it, I was really like, oh, wow, this is just like almost like a completely different movie. And I was ready to not like it by the end, but here comes David Klatt coming in here like at the last second and totally changes my perspective of this movie with this commentary.
Yeah, it's insane, right? Because I didn't hate it. I didn't. When I first watched it, I was like, whoa. Well, first of all, I was like, holy crap, the editing in this thing is absolutely insane. Whoever edited this, you are a technical wizard because you edited 2 movies together. But also, I was laughing the whole time. I was like, this is so stupid. The dubbing is bad, whatever. And then David comes in and he makes the case for why this is culturally important, how much care actually went into this. Raymond Burr, the star, the white man that they put into this movie to really make the connecting piece how important he was.
Old Steve Martin.
Yes, not funny Steve Martin. This is dry Steve Martin. Just journalist from the United States comes in. I love it. There's something so funny about there's not a crazy amount of dubbing in this version. They just let Japanese people speak Japanese with no subtitles, and then they just have Steve Martin be like, "My Japanese is a little rusty. Can you tell me what's going on here?" And then the dude just translates it.
So I mean, like that kind of stuff takes a lot of the emotional punch to a lot of these scenes, where it's like these people describing these horrific events, and it's just like a guy like dryly explaining like, "Oh yeah, he said Godzilla destroyed his village and his brother's dead," and it's just like a laundry list. Which, I mean, it's still horrific what he's saying, but at the same time, it's said so basically. It's just, you're like, oh, like it just takes out so much weight of the scene.
Yeah, it takes a lot out of it, and the dubbing isn't great. There's some, God, like I said, the editing is wild. Where there's a scene where like Steve Martin's laying like in the medical bed, right? He's hurt, and they make it look like reverse shot. He's talking to a person talking from the Japanese original who's not in the room. And just the way it's cut is just absolutely, like, that had to be so hard to set up. They had to have a plan to do something like this.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there would be like one scene where it's the regular Japanese movie, and then like they kind of like the character in the Japanese version bends over to like talk to Steve Martin, and it's at the same time it cuts to the American version where it's just like a back view of their back. And so it's like somebody that kind of looks like them that's talking to Steve Martin.
Yeah, and luckily they did. Steve Martin is like the only white dude in this. They at least did get at least Asian actors into the movie speaking English parts. I guess one of the dubbers is James Hong. Like he says in the commentary, Mr. Ping from Kung Fu Panda does the
freaking
movie.
Freaking David Lopan from Big Trouble in Little China.
Exactly. I mean, he's one of the most recognizable actors of all time. Like, even when I was young, I was like, "Oh, it's that guy." I know that guy. He's in so much.
Oh, I know, and he plays the two leading male characters in the love triangle, which is funny.
Yeah, what a legend. And so, like, overall, I will say that the commentary was good and it made its case. I still don't love this movie. I still think it's definitely inferior, but it definitely has its place in history, for sure.
Yeah, and it's funny because like when I was watching it now, I'm like, this just feels like any other monster movie I've seen. It's just really dry, just not a whole lot of the emotional weight, and a lot of the human connections are cut out of the movie. So like the human characters that are in it are pretty weak in my opinion, but like I said, David Klatt comes in and goes on like there was no other monster movies to compare this to. This was the monster movie, so all the other ones are copying Godzilla, and at the same time, this ended up being one of the most successful foreign movies in America. This was like the fourth highest grossing foreign movie in America of all time at one point. Yeah. And so without this movie, Godzilla would not have been a worldwide phenomenon, because since this movie was made, they were able to take this to other countries and like have Steve Martin instead be an American journalist. He could be a French journalist or German journalist or whatever. So it was really easy to make this movie like super accessible to other countries, and it made Godzilla like a worldwide star. And if we didn't have this movie, we wouldn't have any other Godzilla movies, maybe.
Heck, you could argue that if it wasn't for this movie, you could have been like you are now, but not a Godzilla fan. You could have just not been a Godzilla fan because it just didn't have that popularity.
I wouldn't have had this Godzilla poster right behind me.
I love that poster, by the way.
I know. I wouldn't have had any of these books. I wouldn't have had any of this blanket that has Godzilla characters on it. So it would be really weird not to have Godzilla to be in my lore of me. So while I do appreciate the cultural significance and I do appreciate the weight that this movie brings, it's inferior to the original one.
Exactly. It's just an inferior movie. I would recommend watching this only if you've seen the original and you have some interest and curiosity in kind of diving out.
But I mean, freaking, if we haven't sold the commentary enough, like I would say, like that, just get the American one just to hear his commentary, because it is really passionate and it goes on and pretty much takes anybody to task and critics to task for saying like this is just a dumb monster movie.
Exactly. What a cool dude. Shouts out to him. If he's on Twitter, we gotta tweet at him. We gotta shoot him a tweet.
Oh, you best believe, and I will be. But this will, again, I'm really glad I was able to share this experience with you, Nathan, and I really excited to talk about this type of thing again with you. And when we do cover the next one, hopefully it'll be just as good.
No, exactly. Thank you for the set. I'm really happy that I've seen this movie now, and I'm glad that I really enjoyed it. I'm glad I get to share this experience with you. And I don't know, I've been thinking about the sequel, so I'm really excited to watch it.
Absolutely, but I think I'm pretty good. I mean, there's other stuff I want to talk about. Like, okay, one last thing, really quick. I swear to God, is how they shot two separate images on one piece of celluloid. You know what I'm talking about? How,
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
they would shoot a ridge, and then they would have like a Godzilla puppet filmed by a separate crew, and they would shoot it on the same piece of film. And if they messed that up, then pretty much they would have like 2 months worth of work like
insane.
Messed up in one go. But I had to get that last fact out. I'm sorry.
Well, thank you. No, you're good, man. No worries. I'm sure we'll text after the show and you'll be like, oh, I forgot this and this and this. It's bound to happen.
Oh, you know I will. Nathan, is there any last thing that you would like to add?
No, I think I'm good on my end.
I think we're ready to find out, what will we be talking about next time, Nathan?
Oh, what are we talking about? Well, I really hope that you hate all drugs, especially marijuana, because we're going to be watching The Cool and the Crazy streaming on Tubi. I'm
ready to get high on this episode.
Okay, sounds good.
I'm certainly on a high right now, Nathan, after talking about Godzilla.
Oh, I know. And if you're on a high after listening to this episode about Godzilla, shoot us an email about what you enjoyed or any recommendations over at drive-in-double-feature-podcast@gmail.com. There are no dashes in that email, just to let you know. It is all just one big chunk of words.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. I know this episode is a little longer than usual, but thank you so much for joining us along the ride, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
See you next time.